Medical risk factors, unravelling the confusion. Hi, Peter Strauss is my name. This presentation is the result of trying to get to a better understanding of risk factors. The underlying analysis of risk factors leads us to an understanding of risk factor limitations and risk factor applications. It will help us understand true causation. In order to be effective in treatment of disease, we need to know causation, of course, as we don't want to waste our time, money and energy on treating symptoms that only cause undesirable side effects at the same time. First, let's have a look for a risk factor definition. The World Health Organization states, a risk factor is any attribute, characteristic or exposure of an individual that increases the likelihood of developing a disease or an injury. Wiki states a risk factor is a variable associated with an increased risk of a disease or infection. Hence, a risk factor is associated with a negative outcome, or whatever our interest is. But as we know, association is not necessarily causation. This severely limits the usefulness of risk factors. In this presentation, we will analyze risk factors and we will get to a better level of understanding. We will differentiate risk factors into 4 different types, 2 of which cause a problem or make it worse, and 2 which are only associated and do not influence the disease outcome at all. For completeness, we will also add another factor which has a positive influence on the disease outcome. Hence, after we've gone through the theoretical section, we will have ended up with 5 factors in total. 3 that influence the disease outcomes and 2 that are only associated and don't influence the disease outcome. After we have separated the wheat from the chaff, we will look at practical applications of the theoretical approach developed. After this introduction, we will look at risk factor theory, followed by some practical examples of the application of this theory through looking at a car accident, the flu, heart disease, diabetes type 2, and affluent cancers. In this first theoretical section, we will look at dependent and independent variables with respect to causation. Later, we will also look at causal differences. Assume we have a variable, for instance heart disease or cancer, and we want to know what might truly cause the high cancer rates. We will call this variable B. We notice that when B goes up, so does another variable, which we call A. This gives us 3 relationship options. A can cause B to go up, B can cause A to go up, or they can go up purely coincidentally. We can summarize that as follows. A influences B, B influences A, or the observation is just coincidental. Now let's introduce a third associated variable, C. C also varies as B and A change. And let's assume that if we control A and reverse its direction, we also reverse the direction of B. That is a pretty good indicator of causality. This means A is our independent variable and B is our dependent variable. B depends on A as A causes B to change. Under these circumstances, we ask ourselves, what relationships can the variable C have? Remember, all 3 variables appear to go up and down under the same conditions. After all, they're associated. Well, A can influence C, C can influence A. C can influence B, B can influence C, and again C could also not be really causally related, and the association could be purely coincidental. We can write that short as follows. Let's have a closer look at these 4 options. If A influences both B and C, we have one single cause and multiple effects, multiple dependent variables and one single independent variable. A, B and C are correlated, but C does not cause B, our area of interest, to change. C is also influenced or controlled by A. We can say that B and C run in parallel. We could call the relationship between B and C parallel consequential. They are both a consequence of the same cause, which is the independent factor A. C is just like B in associated dependent variable resulting in association but no causation. If C influences A and A in turn influences B, then we will have causation. Although this is indirect, of course, and we're already measuring this causation through the relationship between A and B. There's an association between A, B and C causes B to change. C is an independent variable in this role. If B influences C, then there will be a correlation between the three of them, but again, this has no implications for B as the direction of causation flows away from B. C in this role is a dependent variable. Again, while there is an association of all three variables, there is no causation of B by C. What if C influences B? This makes C another independent variable like A that causes B to change. Hence, if C is dependent, there is no causation, but if C is independent, there is a causal factor coming from C influencing B. We conclude that causation is only possible if C is an independent variable. That should not be much of a surprise, of course, but this was just to make this absolutely clear. For the moment, we will park the fifth option, which is that C is a coincidental variable, but we will get back to that later. Next, in the theory section, we will build on this and explore causal differences in the types of actions that are in between cause and effect. If both A and C influence B in a causal way, then in an epidemiological setting it would be nearly impossible to have A and C influencing B the same way at the same rate. That gives us the following options. A can be stronger at influencing B than C is, and A can be weaker at influencing B than C. C being stronger might not only be in strength, but this might also mean that the influence of C is easier to notice under more circumstances and over longer periods of time. We could define the differences as follows. A true causal factor has a strong influence and is there most, if not all the time, under likely most, if not all conditions. If we remove the cause, then the disease will not occur, or if it has occurred, removal will stop progression of the disease, and the disease might even reverse. The weaker factor we could call a contributing factor. It has a weak positive influence on B, and it might not be there all the time, and it might not be there under all conditions. If we remove the contributing factor, the disease will still happen, but removal will reduce the numbers in populations and progression or symptom severity in patients. By itself, it will not revert the disease. Other weaker factors we could call mitigating factors. In contrast to the contributing factor, these have a weak negative influence on B and might not be there all the time either. If we remove the mitigating factor, the disease will still happen, but numbers in populations will be somewhat higher and individuals might have more severity of symptoms. If the disease has already started, introducing the mitigating factors will not revert nor stop the disease. Hence, that gives us three ways of influencing disease outcomes, 3 degrees of causation if you wish. There is the strongest factor, which we call causal. There is a weaker positive factor, which we call the contributing factor, and there's a weaker negative factor, which we call the mitigating factor. This captures all causal options. Now, what about the other associations that do not influence the outcome? Those associations that are not causal. We already saw this diagram, and we call this parallel consequential. C is associated with B, but there is no causal link. So now we have 3 causal factors and 1 non-causal factor. And there is the coincidental one, which we also saw earlier. While associated, there is actually no real logical relationship. For instance, the records of scurvy might tell us that scurvy only concerns white people. In reality, it was the white people traveling long distances overseas and also taking records that created these records. Being European did not cause the scurvy, the long distance travel without vitamins did. Polynesians would have encountered the same problems, but they did not write this down. Being European was associated but purely coincidental. Let's have a look at how this might work out in practice. Here is a long list of symptoms. Say you notice the loss of appetite, nausea and diarrhea. With those three symptoms, it's obviously hard to absorb food. Perhaps malabsorption of nutrients through a bowel infection causes the loose teeth. Or you notice the general feeling unwell, fatigue, loss of appetite, nausea, diarrhea, fever and painful joints and muscles. One could think the underlying cause is an infection of the joints. While all these are possibly symptoms of lack of vitamin C. We might not see the cause, we might only see some of the symptoms. That makes diagnosis hard and quite a skill. We can call the symptoms parallel consequential risk factors. They are all associated with one cause, the lack of vitamin C in this case, and they all occur in parallel. They all occur next to each other. It's easy to get confused and jump to incorrect conclusions. Here is a diagram of the understanding we have developed. We have the disease on the right. It's influenced by mitigating factors, by contributing factors, and by the cause itself. The contributing and causal factors are all part of the risk factors as they have a negative influence on the outcome. The mitigating factors have got a positive influence on the outcome, so they're not part of the risk factors. Both contributing and mitigating factors are confounding factors as they cloud the real cause and can influence the outcome. Hence, if we want to know the main causal factor, we might need to identify these confounding factors so they can be controlled or measured. The cause and the contributing risk factors also cause the parallel consequential risk factors. Any other factors left over do not have a logical explanation for the association, and they must be coincidental. We can separate them by using different observation types, taking different vantage points. In other words, different ways of looking at the same problem. In order to influence disease outcomes, we not only need to separate the cause and the contributing factors from the parallel consequential and the coincidental factors, but also we need to include the mitigating factors. All this means is that risk factors do not really focus correctly on the area we need to focus on if we're after health. Risk factors do not fully overlap with the area we should be focusing on, as they also contain other factors that are of no importance to our disease, nor do risk factors include any factors mitigating our disease. This obviously significantly limits the usefulness of risk factors. Let's redraw this in a different way. The cause causes the disease. The contributing factors make the disease worse. There are also mitigating factors reducing the disease. Both cause and contributing factors can lead to parallel consequential risk factors. And lastly, we have the coincidental risk factors that are just on the scene by accident. Now let's use this perspective to analyze a few real scenarios. We will have a look at a car accident example, next a flu example, then heart disease, diabetes type 2, and lastly our high affluent cancer rates. First, the car accident example. Monday morning, my wife and I drive our cars to work. Normally I would drive the newer BMW to work, but because I get her older Fiat serviced that day near my work, I end up driving her Fiat. On my way to work, my mind thinks about the tasks ahead for the day, and in one moment of inattention, I end up rear-ending a car at a set of traffic lights. While this happens, a doggy is doing its business at a tree and seems oblivious to the crash. The car is out of action for 2 weeks, and one of us will have to use the bus to go to work. In order to analyze our risk factors, we need one single perspective. Otherwise, we would be shifting the goalposts during our analysis and get confused. The single perspective could be many things, like the way I function on Monday mornings. It could be male versus female driving, etc. Let's us examine this from a perspective of financial damage and the cost in time and inconvenience caused. What risk factor types can we find? The accident happened with the older car. This mitigates some damage as this might reduce repair costs through cheaper second-hand parts. Also, it might not be that important to end up with a absolute perfect car. So being an older car, this might mitigate the damage, it might reduce it. Preoccupation with work is a contributing risk factor. If I hadn't thought about work, I could have been worrying about my sick mother, my relationship with my wife or boss, etc. Any distractions from concentrating on driving potentially contributed to the accident. Contributing factors do not cause the accident per se, but make accidents more likely to happen. There could well have been sufficient inattention to cause the accident even without the contributing factors. Apart from the mental state, my state of health, of course, could be another contributing risk factor. If I'm less healthy, I will function less well and likely will be more accident prone. Inattention was the real cause of the accident. I did not pay attention to the car in front of me. I did not pay attention to a safe driving distance between myself and the other car. While psychologically I might like to blame the accident onto something else, if I'm honest with myself, it was simply my own fault. Coincidentally, the dog just happened to have a wee while I had the accident nearby. Another coincidental risk factor could be me being white-skinned. Interestingly, proportionally, the chances of a white-skinned person ending up in an accident are bigger, because currently the richer people on the planet that are more likely to drive cars tend to be the white-skinned type. While there is a correlation, there is no causation. It's simply coincidental. There will be other consequences in parallel with what we are focusing on, which was the financial damage, the cost in time and the inconvenience. These are consequences like having to use the bus instead, my wife and I having to share cars, and being more limited in movements during these 2 weeks of car repair. There are other parallel consequences for the other car and the driver that I bumped into. All these consequences run in parallel with our focus, our own financial and time costs and the inconvenience. We can say they are parallel consequential, as they are also stemming from the same accident and in the end from my inattention while driving. Let's have a look at visualizing this. Here is our overview. We decided that the damage costs, the time and the inconvenience was going to be the focus of our analysis. The cause of our damage in cost, time and inconvenience was my inattention. A parallel consequence of both my inattention and preoccupation with work was that one of us needs to use the bus to get to work while the car is being repaired. A mitigating factor was that the car was old and possibly second-hand parts could be used, and this reduced the financial costs. A factor contributing to the damage in dollars, the time and inconvenience might well have been my preoccupation with work. The dog having a wee nearby was purely coincidental. Let's have a look at a common flu scenario. On a Monday morning, one colleague walks into the office of 20 people while sneezing and coughing with the flu. Over the next 6 weeks, another 3 people get sick with the flu, but the others remain okay. In the same 6 weeks, there are renovations happening in the office, and it gets a new air conditioning system. One person that gets sick is missing out on a social sport event on the weekend because being too sick to participate. We need one single perspective, and we will choose 3 staff members getting sick. This is the consequence. This is the subject of our investigation. The cause was likely the sick, sneezing and coughing colleague that walked in on that particular Monday morning. Contributing to our staff members getting sick would have been factors like being run down and an unhealthy lifestyle with lots of empty calories like alcohol, sugar and fat. Mitigating factors are those that reduce your chances to get sick, like a healthy diet with fresh vegetables and fruit containing natural vitamins. It reduces one's chances to get sick. This factor, or else previous flu exposure, likely stopped the other 17 from getting sick. The person missing out on the sporting event on the weekend was a consequence parallel with the 3 staff in the office getting sick. Another consequence would have been that these 3 staff members infected their own families and neighborhood. Their children might have been missing out on sports as well because they got sick themselves or because mum and dad were not available to transport them. There can be many parallel consequential risk factors. That the office got another air conditioning system installed was purely coincidental. This was observed to be happening at the same time as our 3 staff members getting sick, but it was purely coincidental. Let's have a look at medical risk factors for heart disease. We know of elevated blood pressure, elevated serum cholesterol levels, being overweight, family history of heart disease, diabetes type 2, lack of exercise, smoking, blonde hair, and a high-fat animal-based diet. Blonde hair, I hear you say? Hair color was just thrown into the mix as an example of coincidental risk factors. Only white-skinned people have blonde hair, and white people being more affluent, the white people proportionally have higher heart disease. We said before that if the disease can be reverted, that tells us that we are looking at the cause. Like the vitamin C story, really. If we reintroduce vitamin C, all those scurvy symptoms will disappear. Let's have a look at being cured from heart disease. First we see Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn. He cured a couple of hundred people from heart disease through a low-fat, whole plant-based diet. Their cholesterol levels come down, their blood pressure came down, diabetes type 2 disappears, their weight comes down if they're overweight, and the arteries open up again. Here we see coronary arteries that opened up after 32 months on a low-fat, whole plant-based diet. Patients actually often start to feel better within weeks because of the blood flow not being impaired anymore through the fats in the diet. And is Esselstyn the only one? No, there is also Dr. Dean Ornish. Him and his team cured probably thousands of people from heart disease through a low-fat, whole plant-based diet by now. The patient's cholesterol levels come down, their blood pressures come down, diabetes type 2 disappears, the weight comes down, and the arteries open up. Dean is paid nowadays by Medicare and some private health funds to apply his lifestyle medicine to his patients. Telling a person what to eat and supporting them in the changes is much cheaper than open heart surgery. It increases the lifespan and energy levels of the patients as well. Dean and his colleagues have been teaching their successful methods to other hospitals. There is also Dr. John McDougall. He cured many people from heart disease through a low-fat, whole plant-based diet. The cholesterol levels come down, blood pressure comes down, diabetes type 2 disappears, their weight comes down if they're overweight, the arteries open up. Dr. John McDougall calls the starch-based diet of whole plants a natural diet. He's been fighting very hard to reduce the influence of financial interests and strongly promotes truly uncorrupted evidence-based medicine. Nathan Pritikin, a pioneer in heart disease through diet. The first person to cure himself from heart disease through a low-fat, whole plant-based diet in the early 1960s. His cholesterol levels came down, his blood pressure came down. Nathan's story is really a remarkable one. He was an engineer that thought that there would be better options than those that a dozen or so cardiologists he had visited had offered him. He did his own research and was very successful. He got better from heart disease and went back to exercise, to the exercise that he loved. So how do the risk factors for heart disease fit into our picture? We have elevated blood pressure, elevated serum cholesterol levels, being overweight, family history of heart disease, diabetes type 2, lack of exercise, smoking, hair color, high-fat animal-based diet. First, let's have a look at the cause. As we could see from the stories of Dr. Esselstyn, Ornish and McDougall, and there are others like Dr. Baxter Montgomery, Joel Furman, Kim Williams and Neil Barnard, putting patients on a low-fat, whole plant-based diet cures heart disease patients. That means that the cause of heart disease is in the food that the patients avoid. In other words, the cause must be in a high-fat, animal and processed food-based diet. Next, let's have a look at the parallel consequential risk factors. As the patient's heart got better, also their blood pressure levels came down. Hence, the elevated blood pressure was a parallel consequence of being on the wrong diet. The same for cholesterol levels, weight, and diabetes type 2. They are all a parallel consequence of being on the wrong diet. This is also the diet that gives one the lowest chance to get one of the affluent cancers, get an autoimmune disease, or get osteoporosis. There are logical explanations for all these diseases being also caused by the Western diet of processed food and animal-based food. Smoking too can raise blood pressure, hence it contributes to some of the parallel consequential risk factors. However, smoking will not contribute to all of the parallel consequential risk factors. Let's have a look at the contributing risk factors. People that smoke have a higher chance to get heart disease. However, researchers have encountered smokers in Papua New Guinea that smoked their whole lives, but had nearly perfect arteries at the time of death, after a life of mostly a plant-based diet. Hence, smoking contributes to the problem, but it isn't really the main cause. Smoking makes the effect of the diet worse. It adds to the effect of the bad diet. It contributes to it. Next, let's have a look at mitigating risk factors. We can see that exercise appears to have a negative effect on heart disease rates. People that exercise have less chance to get heart disease. However, it doesn't stop people from getting heart disease, and you cannot exercise yourself out of heart disease. But you can eat yourself out of heart disease, as we have seen. Hence, exercise can diminish or somewhat mitigate the damage done through diet. Medicines and operations might have some relief of symptoms as well, but obviously introduce side effects, some of which can be very severe. Next, let's have a look at coincidental risk factors. People with blonde hair have a higher heart disease risk than dark hair. This is caused by more blonde people living in the affluent world. If they change the diet, they get better. If they color their hair, nothing will happen. This would make hair color purely coincidental. Often the family history of heart disease is coincidental too, which we can see from patients getting better despite the family history of heart disease. Dietary habits too run in both families and cultures. Blaming genetics is like blaming the parents and not taking responsibility for your own actions and health consequences. If family history were to have an influence on the outcome, at worst it would be a contributing factor. So the high-fat animal and processed food diet is the cause of heart disease. Elevated blood pressure, parallel consequential. Elevated cholesterol levels, parallel consequential. Being overweight is parallel consequential. Diabetes type 2 is parallel consequential. Family history of heart disease is not necessarily, but often coincidental. Exercise mitigating, but sometimes it can bring a heart attack on. Smoking is a contributing one. Hair color is coincidental. Of course, we are mostly interested in those factors that cause, contribute, or mitigate our disease under study, as they are the only ones making a difference. Combating the parallel, consequential, and coincidental risk factors will not really do anything for our disease outcome. If it is health we're after, we can leave the parallel, consequential, and coincidental risk factors out of the picture. Next, we will have a look at diabetes type 2. Here is a list of risk factors that were mentioned on the website. Family history of diabetes, being overweight, unhealthy diet, physical inactivity, increasing age, high blood pressure, ethnicity, impaired glucose intolerance. When looking at heart disease, we already saw evidence of reversibility of diabetes type 2. That means that this disease is also caused by the high-fat animal and processed food diet. We saw under heart disease that also weight came down, and so did blood pressure, as diabetes type 2 disappeared through the diet change. This makes those factors parallel consequential. People got better at times despite the family history of diabetes. This means family history must have been coincidental, or at worst it might have been a slightly contributing factor. Of course, eating habits run in families too, not just genes. So there might be a non-causal relationship. The eating habits are the true cause, the family relationship is not. People got better despite further increase in age. Age likely was a contributing factor, as exposing oneself for longer to a bad diet is more likely to cause problems. Ethnicity was likely coincidental. The diabetes type 2 rates in China have gone up from less than 1% in 1980 to over 11.6% currently. Again, changing cultural habits are the most likely player here. Physical inactivity will be a contributing factor. Through using our muscles, we burn fat, which is at the base of our diabetes type 2. Hence, exercise reduces the cause and is a mitigating factor. Failing the impaired glucose tolerance test is another parallel consequence of being on a bad diet. Here are all that in a diagram, the disease being diabetes type 2, the Western diet of fatty and processed foods, animal-based foods being the cause. Increased age and physical inactivity contributes to diabetes type 2. The increased age only because we are exposing ourselves for longer to the causes. Our diet and physical inactivity also lead to being overweight, elevated blood pressure and impaired glucose tolerance test. Family history or ethnicity have only very minor roles, if any. That means that all we have to do in order to avoid or getting better from diabetes type 2 is increase our physical activity and eat a low-fat whole plant-based diet plus a B12 supplement. All other risk factors are of no consequence. You might have thought that it is the carbohydrates and sugars that we eat that cause diabetes. After all, it's them that are converted into this blood sugar level that ends up being too high in diabetes type 2. Well, there's a lot of confusion, even amongst our specialists. Let's have a look and see if we can clear this up. But first, let's have a look together at the concept of primary and secondary symptoms. Say I jump and hurt my foot. The hurting foot is then a primary symptom. It's the direct result of the jump that went wrong. Because of the foot hurting, I now start to limp. This limping is a secondary symptom following the jump. It is indirectly caused by the jump. I could have broken my arm instead in the fall and I would have not be limping. The important thing is that the foot hurting causes me to limp. The take-home message is that there are primary and secondary symptoms, and that the primary symptoms cause the secondary symptoms. Now let's have a look at diabetes type 2. Here we see blood glucose levels of a normal person during an average day. The glucose levels are in red, and we see them going up after 3 meals in a day. In blue we find the insulin levels, and we see that as soon as the blood sugar starts to go up a little, the insulin levels are increased immediately in order to lower these rising levels. As we know, there are many complications from having blood sugar levels too high. Hence, it's a good thing that the insulin tries to bring the levels down so fast. Now in diabetes type 2, the body still produces insulin after the sugar levels have gone up, but the cells in the body are insulin resistant. Hence, the excess sugar is not removed anymore from the bloodstream, and as a result, the blood sugar levels go up much more than normally would be the case after a meal. The blood sugar levels going up are a secondary symptom. They come as a result of the insulin resistance. They come as a result of the insulin not being able to take the glucose out of the blood and store it in the cells. If you keep on adding sugar to the blood and don't remove it, the levels will go up. We can get the blood sugar levels back to normal in 2 ways. Eating the wrong food, avoiding starches, so no starches can be converted into blood sugar. This avoids the problem of not being able to handle starches. Or we can fix the cause, in other words, the cell insulin resistance, which we can only do through avoiding fats. So the high blood sugar levels are a secondary symptom caused by the primary symptom of insulin resistance, which in turn is caused by the fats in the diet. Here are some references if you want to explore this further. Next, we'll have a look at our affluent cancers. Cancer cause. At the root of cancer is damage to the DNA, which perhaps might just happen spontaneously, or contributed to by carcinogens like tobacco smoke, alcohol, asbestos, benzene from petrol, etc. Sometimes DNA damage allows the cancer cell to divide unrestricted. Now, once this has happened, we are too late to fight the cancer cause, as removing the cause, whatever that might have been, will not remove the cancer we already have. All we are left to work with are the contributing factors and the mitigating factors. Do all cancer cells turn into a full-blown cancer? An interesting phenomena is spontaneous remissions. Sometimes spontaneous remissions can occur. The cancer can stop growing and sometimes even spontaneously disappear. Cases of spontaneous remissions have been regularly documented in the medical literature. Dr. Kelly Turner did her PhD researching spontaneous remissions. She looked at 1,500 cases documented in the medical literature. She also interviewed 250 patients, asking them just one question: what do you think helped you to get better? She wrote a book about her research, which she called Radical Remission, as she does not believe anymore that they are spontaneous. Spontaneous remissions tell us that not every rogue cell turns into a full-blown cancer cell, and this must really mean that there is more to a cancer cell becoming a problem growth than just DNA damage. We need to understand why not every rogue cell turns into a full-blown cancer, as this might help us fight cancer. We need to understand why sometimes even a full-blown cancer can go into remission. What factors could influence the cancer cell growing into a full-blown life-threatening cancer? As we saw, spontaneous remissions tell us there are other factors out there that need exploring. Well, there are only two parties in this gathering. That is our body with its immune system, and there's the cancer growth. That means, in principle, we have three options. We can work on our body's immune system, or we can work on the cancer, or work on both, of course. Both our body's immune system and also the cancer can be either stimulated or suppressed. It makes sense that we want to stimulate our immune system and remove any immune system suppressants. It also makes sense that we want to suppress cancer growth and remove any cancer growth stimulation. Let's have a look at our body's immune system. Stimulating the body's immune system will give us a better chance to fight the cancer. This is a cancer mitigating factor. Suppressing the body's immune system will give us a worse chance to fight the cancer. This is a cancer contributing factor. Let's have a look at cancer growth next. Suppressing cancer growth might give us a better chance to fight the cancer. This is a cancer mitigating factor. Stimulating cancer growth will give us a worse chance to fight cancer. This is a cancer's contributing factor. Let's summarize what we've just seen. There's only two parties present in the process of a cancer cell turning into a full life-threatening cancer: our body with its immune system and the cancer. This process of a cancer cell turning into a full-blown life-threatening cancer can be influenced in 4 different ways. We can suppress the immune system, and we can stimulate the immune system. We can suppress the cancer, and we can stimulate the cancer. For a detailed analysis of cancer causing, contributing, and mitigating factors, there will be a few links at the end of the presentation. But basically, the cause is DNA damage, which leads to cancer growth. The cancer growth can be positively influenced by 40 to 50 extra growth factors coming from animal food or medication. It can also be positively influenced by immunosuppressants like chemotherapy, immunotherapy, and viruses like AIDS. The cancer growth can be negatively influenced by immunotherapy, immune stimulation in the form of healthy eating, exercise, and social support, and also through a reduction of both endogenous and exogenous growth factors. Extra hormones also cause other hormonal effects, influencing menstruation, moods, other growths apart from cancer, sexual maturation well before being physically ready, early menarche, and later menopause. A few comments on cancer research. Because cancer is somewhat complex, The general approach is to break it down into smaller sections. The problem with that is that one does not know what the final picture looks like that we need to work towards. For instance, even the World Health Organization labeled red meat as probably carcinogenic. This means they looked at meat in isolation. Since the major cause of our high cancer rates are the growth factors in the animal food, looking at red meat only is like looking at tooth decay coming from Mars bars in a society that also eats Kit Kats, sugary drinks, lollies, cakes, jam, etc. In such a noisy environment, it will be hard to find a clear signal. Another big factor in cancer research are the enormous commercial interests that seep in everywhere, including the not-for-profit organizations. As a matter of fact, they often appear to be set up to con the population. For a deep analysis on why the major factor is the growth factors from the animal food, see Cancer Prevention and Cure, what you yourself can do. There's a short version of just under 13 minutes and a long version of over 1 hour and 30 minutes. There is also a different approach leading to the same conclusion called Affluent Cancers and Diet, Unravelling the Confusion. All three are on YouTube. May this presentation contribute to the mitigation of unnecessary human suffering through attacking the true cause of many of our diseases, and have as a parallel consequence that less greenhouse gases are produced by belching and farting cows, and that animal suffering is greatly reduced. May dangerous beliefs like omnivorism be eradicated, and the human herd intelligence be raised to the level where our species gets enough insight to stop damaging his fellow earthlings, his own home, and above all, himself or herself. May the day come that pure science is seen as more important than economics. Being led by science is the only way to eradicate the corruption of public interests, which benefits only some individuals at the cost of the rest. We humans have a brain. Let's make use of it. Together and properly. Include all the facts in our emotional decision making. Wishing you the very best of health, Peter Strauss.